I'm not selling Daddy's bike, Lily said, her voice trembling but her jaw set tight. I'm asking you to help save my mama. There's a difference. Every pair of eyes in that bar went dead silent. If this story moves you, if you believe in the kind of love that walks 8 miles in the dark for someone else, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit that bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning Lily Harper made the hardest decision of her 9-year-old life. The sky outside was the color of a bruise, that deep, ugly purple that shows up just before the sun gives up trying to break through. The trailer was cold. It was always cold in the winter because the electric bill was the third thing on the list of things they couldn't afford, right behind the rent and the medication that kept Grace Harper breathing. Lily had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not because she had a nightmare, not because she was scared of the dark. She was awake because she had been lying on her side on the pull-out couch listening to her mother cough. That hollow, rattling cough that had become the sound of their lives, the sound that played in the background of every meal. Every conversation, every prayer Lily had whispered into her hands before bed for the past 11 months. She counted the coughs the way other kids counted sheep. 1, 2, 3. By the time she hit 17, she was already on her feet. The kitchen light flickered when she turned it on. She stood in the middle of the linoleum floor in her sock feet and stared at the stack of papers on the kitchen table. They had been there so long, they might as well have been part of the furniture. Red letters, bolded numbers, phrases like final notice and account referred to collections, and one that just said in plain black ink at the bottom of the page, "We regret to inform you." Lily couldn't read all the words, but she understood numbers. And the number at the top of the largest envelope, the one from Collin County Medical Center, said $42,318. She knew what that meant. She had heard her Aunt Deborah say it on the phone 2 weeks ago when she thought Lily was asleep in the back room. "Grace, if you can't come up with something by the end of the month, they're going to turn off the treatment." "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm telling you what the woman at the billing office told me. That's the reality." And her mother's voice thin as paper. "I know, Deb. I know." Lily had pressed her face into the pillow so nobody would hear her cry. She was good at that. She had gotten very good at a lot of things she never should have had to learn. She walked to the back door of the trailer and pushed it open. The cold hit her like a hand across the face, flat and mean, and without apology. She crossed the scrubby backyard in the dark and stopped at the shed. Her breath came out in little clouds. She stood there for a long moment, with her hand on the padlock, the key already in her palm. She had found it 2 days ago, tucked inside the coffee can on the top shelf of her mother's closet, next to a photograph of her father, Ryan Harper, sitting on his Harley-Davidson with a grin so wide it looked like it could split his face clean in half. He had been 26 in that photo. Lily knew that because her mother had told her on one of the good days when Grace could sit up straight and talk without stopping to breathe. "Your daddy was 26 and I was 23, and we didn't have a single dollar between us. But Lord, Lily, we were happy." Lily turned the key in the lock. The shed door swung open and the smell hit her, first oil leather and something else underneath it. Something she couldn't name, but that made her chest tight every single time. That was her father's smell. That was what was left of him. The Harley-Davidson sat in the center of the shed under a tarp. Lily pulled the tarp back slowly, the way you pull back a sheet from someone sleeping, careful not to disturb anything. The chrome caught what little light crept in from outside and threw it back at her in thin, shimmering lines. She stood there looking at it. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She had made her decision before she ever came out here. She had made it lying on that couch, counting her mother's coughs in the dark. Crying was for after. Right now, she needed to think. She reached out and put both hands on the handlebar grips. The leather was cold beneath her palms. She stood there like that for a moment, a 9-year-old girl in a threadbare coat and sock feet, holding on to the one thing her father had left behind, as if she could draw something from it. Strength, maybe, or permission. She wasn't sure which one she needed more. She took the key from the lock, pressed it into the pocket of her jeans, and walked back inside. Her mother was awake when she got there. Grace Harper was sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, both hands wrapped around a mug of hot water. Not tea, because the tea was gone, and she was looking at the stack of papers. Her face was the color of old wax. Her hair, which had once been the dark curly kind that Lily had inherited, had grown back after chemo in thin silver wisps that made her look decades older than 34. She looked up when Lily came in. "You were out back," Grace said. It wasn't a question. "Couldn't sleep." Grace looked at her daughter for a long moment. "Come sit with me." Lily sat down across from her. The kitchen light buzzed above them. Outside, the wind pressed against the side of the trailer, and the walls groaned a little the way they always did, like the whole structure was tired of holding itself together. "Lily, Grace said, I need you to promise me something." "Mama." "No, listen to me." Grace set the mug down and folded her hands on the table, and her eyes were steady in a way the rest of her wasn't. That was one thing the illness had not taken from Grace Harper. She could still look at you in a way that made you feel like the most important person in the world. "That bike stays in this shed. Whatever happens to us, whatever we have to figure out, that bike is not part of it. Your daddy left it to you. Do you understand me?" Lily looked at her mother's hands. The knuckles were swollen. There were bruises on the inside of her wrist from the IV line. "Mama," Lily said carefully, "what happens at the end of the month with the hospital?" A pause, just a half a second, but Lily caught it. She always caught it. "We'll figure it out," Grace said. "Mrs. Purvis at the school said there are programs. We've applied to every program there is, baby." "Then what about Aunt Deborah? Deborah doesn't have that kind of money." "Then what?" Lily's voice came out louder than she meant it to, and she pulled it back. She took a breath. "Mama, what happens if we don't pay them?" Grace looked down at her hands. "They stop the treatment," Lily said. "That's what happens. I know because I heard you and Aunt Deborah talking." Please don't try to tell me I misunderstood." For a long moment, the kitchen was very quiet. Grace picked up the mug of hot water and brought it to her lips, not drinking, just holding it there. When she set it back down, her eyes were wet. "You are too smart," she said softly. "You have always been too smart." "I want to sell Daddy's bike." "No." "Mama." "I said no, Lily." Grace's voice came out sharp, and then she winced as if the sharpness had cost her something physical. "No, that bike is the last thing your father—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "That bike stays. End of discussion." Lily didn't argue. She looked at her mother and nodded and said, "Okay, Mama." But she did not put the key back in the coffee can. She kept it in her pocket for the rest of the day. That afternoon, while Grace rested, Lily sat at the desk in her room with a piece of notebook paper and a stubby pencil and did the math the way she had been doing it in her head for weeks. The hospital bill, the rent they owed, the back payment on the electric, the prescription that had run out 6 days ago and was sitting on the counter at Walgreens, $340, that might as well have been $340,000. She wrote all the numbers down in a column. She added them up 3 times to make sure she had it right. $42,318. Hospital, $1,200. Rent past due, $340. Prescription, $180. Electric, total $44,038. She stared at that number for a long time. She had $47 in the jar under her bed money she had made helping Mrs. Purvis grade papers after school and walking old Mr. Dalton's dog on weekends. She wrote that number down too in a smaller column on the right side of the page. $47. She crossed it out. It felt like an insult to write it next to the other number. Then she wrote something else at the bottom of the page. She printed it out in careful block letters, the way she did on spelling tests when she wanted to make sure she got credit. Big Earl's Bar, Route 9, Hell's Angels. She had heard her father say that name 100 times. She was too young to know exactly what it meant. The organization, the chapters, the history. She only knew what she had seen when she was very small before her father died. Men with leather jackets and loud bikes who called her father brother and whose eyes went soft and different when they talked to her. She knew that Big Earl's was where they used to meet because she had ridden there once on the back of her father's Harley when she was 5, and her mother had driven out an hour later to pick them both up, not angry, but shaking her head in that way she did when Ryan Harper had done something that was ridiculous and wonderful at the same time. She knew her father's name had meant something to those men. She folded the piece of paper and put it in her coat pocket next to the key. That evening, she made dinner. She heated up the last 2 cans of chicken soup and made toast and set a glass of water at her mother's place at the table. Grace came out of the bedroom moving slowly, one hand trailing along the wall. "Smells good," Grace said. "It's just soup, Mama." "Soup's enough." Grace lowered herself into her chair and looked at the table and then at her daughter. "You said it's so nice." Lily shrugged. She had put a paper towel folded into a triangle under the spoon, the way she'd seen someone do it in a movie once. It seemed like the right thing to do. They ate together, and Grace told a story about the time Ryan had tried to cook Thanksgiving dinner and had forgotten to take the bag of giblets out of the turkey. It was a story Lily had heard a dozen times, and she laughed in all the right places, and her mother laughed too, and for about 12 minutes the kitchen felt warm, and the stack of papers on the counter didn't exist. Then Grace's laugh turned into a cough, and the moment broke apart. Lily helped her mother to bed at 8 o'clock. She brought her a glass of water and set it on the nightstand and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. "I love you, baby girl," Grace said. "I love you too, Mama. You're going to be all right, you know that. Whatever happens, you are going to be all right." Lily stood in the doorway and looked at her mother. "You're going to be all right too," she said. "I'll make sure of it." Grace smiled and closed her eyes. Lily went back to the living room and waited. She waited until she heard her mother's breathing even out slow and steady. She waited another 20 minutes after that just to be sure. Then she put on her coat, her hat, her gloves with the hole in the left thumb. She checked the flashlight by tapping it against her palm. Good, still working. She checked the key in her pocket. She checked the folded piece of paper. She stood at the front door of the trailer and she thought about what she was doing. She was 9 years old. It was 40 degrees outside. Big Earl's bar was 8 miles down Route 9 and it was dark, and she didn't know exactly what she was going to say when she got there. But she thought about the number on that piece of paper. $44,038. And she thought about her mother's voice saying, "Whatever happens." And she thought, nothing is going to happen to her. Not if I can stop it. She opened the door and stepped out into the dark. The cold was a living thing. It moved around her and got under her collar and slid through the hole in her left glove, and she pulled her hat down over her ears and started walking. The gravel road out of the trailer park was uneven, and her flashlight threw a narrow cone of yellow light in front of her, just enough to see the next few steps. She counted them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She had walked 8 miles in her life, exactly twice. Once on a field trip to the state park, and once when she and her rare friend Kayla had gotten lost hiking and had to find their way back to the trailhead. Both times she had been fine. Both times someone was walking beside her. She told herself she was fine now, too. She reached Route 9 and turned right and kept walking. The road was mostly empty. A truck passed her going the other direction, headlights sweeping over her, and for a moment she was a small lit shape in the darkness, and then the truck was gone, and she was alone again. Another car passed a few minutes later, going her direction, slowing slightly as it came alongside her, and she kept her flashlight on and her eyes forward, and after a moment, it sped back up and left her. She counted telephone poles. She thought about her father. She thought about the way he used to put her on his shoulders when she was very small, and she could feel the particular solidity of him, the way his hands wrapped around her ankles, the warmth that came off the top of his head. She thought about his voice, which was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that made you feel like there was no emergency that couldn't be sorted out if you just took a breath and thought it through. "You're a Harper," he had told her once when she was scared about something at school. She couldn't even remember what it was now. "Harpers don't quit." She said it out loud to herself, walking down Route 9 in the dark. "Harpers don't quit." Her feet hurt. Her face was numb. She had been walking for an hour and 20 minutes by the time she saw the lights of Big Earl's bar spilling out across the parking lot, orange and yellow, warm-looking from the outside, and the sound of music underneath the wind and the shapes of motorcycles lined up in a row that went on longer than she expected. She stopped at the edge of the parking lot and counted them. 1, 2, 3, she stopped counting at 30. There were more beyond that. She could see them stretching back into the auto at the side of the building. A lot more. She looked at all those motorcycles and something moved in her chest that might have been fear or might have been something else entirely. She pulled the key out of her pocket and held it in her fist. Then she crossed the parking lot and put her hand on the bar door. It was heavy. She had to lean into it with both hands. The door swung open and the music and the smell and the heat and the noise hit her all at once. The kind of full room noise that exists in a place where nobody is being quiet, where glasses are hitting the bar and boots are hitting the floor and voices are going in a dozen directions at once. And then it stopped. Not all at once. It went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something happens that nobody expected. In waves, the people nearest the door going silent first. And then the silence spreading back through the room as heads turned, as eyes found her, as the whole bar registered the fact of her standing there. A small girl in a winter coat with a flashlight in one hand and a key in the other, 8 miles from anywhere, her cheeks red from the cold and her chin up and her eyes absolutely steady. The jukebox played 3 more seconds of a George Strait song, and then someone reached over and pulled the plug. Dead silence. Lily looked around the room. Men everywhere at the bar, at the tables, standing against the wall. Big men, most of them with the kind of faces that had seen things. Leather jackets, tattoos. She clocked all of it in about 4 seconds, and then her eyes found the one she was looking for because he was the one sitting at the center of everything, not physically, but in the way a room organizes itself around certain people. He was probably 50, gray in his beard, a scar that ran along his jaw on the left side. He had been mid-sentence when the room went quiet, and now he was looking at her like she was something he wasn't sure he was seeing correctly. She walked toward him. The crowd parted. Not because anyone moved dramatically, they just sort of shifted, made room the way people do when something is happening and they're not sure what it is yet, but they can feel it matters. Lily stopped about 3 feet from the man with the scar. She said, "My name is Lily Harper. My daddy was Ryan Harper. He used to ride with you." Not a sound in that bar, not one single sound. The man with the scar looked at her for a long moment. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes did a shift, quiet and seismic, like the ground moving under a mountain. "Ryan Harper," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel under a boot. "Yes, sir," Lily said. "He died 4 years ago. I was 5. The man stared at her. "I walked here from Pine Ridge Trailer Park," she continued. "That's 8 miles. I know it's late and I'm sorry for coming in like this, but my mama is real sick and I don't know what else to do." She opened her fist and held out the key. "I want to sell Daddy's bike," she said. I know she'd never agree to it. She doesn't know I'm here, but the hospital says they're going to stop her treatment if we can't pay, and the number is more than $42,000. And the prescriptions have been sitting at Walgreens for 6 days. Her voice didn't tremble. Her hand didn't shake. "My daddy would have done whatever it took. I'm trying to do the same." The man looked at the key in her hand. Then he looked at her face. Then he said very quietly, "What is your mother's name?" "Grace," Lily said. "Grace Harper." Something happened to his face then, something private and large that he didn't try to hide. He leaned forward with both elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment, and the room was so quiet that Lily could hear his breath come out through his nose. Then he looked back up at her. "I know who you are," he said. "I know exactly who you are." The man's name was Axe. That was what everyone called him, and that was the only name Lily would ever know him by, and later she would think that it suited him, not because he was violent or cruel, but because an axe is a tool that cuts through what needs cutting, and that was exactly what he did in the moments that followed. He stood up from his stool slowly the way big men stand when they want to make sure the room feels it, and he was bigger than she'd first realized, a full 1.5 feet taller than her, with hands the size of dinner plates, and a presence that seemed to take up twice the space his body actually occupied. But when he crouched down in front of her, bringing his eyes level with hers, his voice came out careful and quiet, like he was handling something he didn't want to drop. "Ryan Harper was my brother," he said, "not by blood, by something that counts more." Lily looked at him and didn't say anything. She had walked 8 miles in the dark and cold, and she had saved everything she had left for this moment, and now that it was here, she was holding very still, the way you hold still when you finally put all your weight on a piece of ice, and you're waiting to find out if it'll hold. "He rode with us for 6 years, Axe continued. "Came in as a prospect, earned his patch, never once backed down from anything that mattered. Good man," he paused. "Better man than most I've known." From somewhere behind Lily, a voice said, "Amen," and then another. and then a few more quiet and heavy the way men agree to things they don't take lightly. Axe looked at the key still sitting in Lily's open palm. "You walked here yourself," he said. 8 miles. "Yes, sir. At night. I waited until my mama was asleep." He looked at her for a long moment. "How old are you?" "Oh, 9, she said. "I'll be 10 in March." Something moved across his face fast like a cloud shadow crossing a field, and then it was gone. He stood back up to his full height, and he turned around to face the room, and the room was still absolutely silent. Every eye on him, 40 or 50 men who hadn't made a single sound since this little girl had walked through the door, and Axe looked out at them the way a man looks at the people he trusts most in the world. "You all hear what she said," he said. It wasn't a question. Nobody moved. Ryan Harper's girl walked 8 miles in the dark to save her mother's life. He let that sit, and she brought the key to his bike to pay for it. He turned back to Lily and put one big hand out slowly, carefully, and she felt his fingers close gently around her fist, the one holding the key, and he folded her fingers back over it until her hand was closed. "That key doesn't leave your family," he said. "Not tonight, not ever." Lily's throat tightened. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. She had made that deal with herself somewhere around mile 4, when her feet had started hurting in earnest, and the wind had picked up, and the sensible part of her brain had started suggesting she turn around. She had said out loud to no one, "I will not cry in front of them." She was not going to break that promise now. She swallowed hard. "Then I don't know what else I have to offer," she said. Axe looked at her, and she thought she saw something that might have been the edge of a smile, not the warm kind, but the kind that comes when someone does something that earns his real respect. "You don't need to offer anything," he said. "You already gave us something." She didn't understand what he meant. Not right then. But then he turned back to the room and his voice shifted. It went up, went out, filled every corner, and he said, "I want every man in this room to reach into his pocket right now, whatever you've got, whatever you can spare. And if you can't spare it, you give it anyway because that's what Ryan would have done." The room didn't hesitate. That was the thing she would remember for the rest of her life. There was no pause, no deliberation, no one looking at anyone else to see what they were going to do first. The sound that rose up was immediate, the sound of chairs scraping back, boots hitting the floor, hands going into pockets and wallets being pulled out and slapped open. A man at the far end of the bar said something she couldn't hear, and 2 men next to him laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. It was the kind of laugh that happens when something big and real is happening, and people are a little overwhelmed by it, and laughter is the only thing that fits. Axe turned back to her. "You said 42,000, he said. $42,318, Lily said, "plus the rent and the prescription." He nodded once. "Sit down. You want something to drink? Hot chocolate, something." She blinked. The question was so normal, so completely ordinary against everything else that was happening that it almost knocked her sideways. Yes, she said, "please." A man she hadn't noticed before was already moving behind the bar, and within 2 minutes a mug of hot chocolate appeared in front of her. Not the powdered kind, she noted, real hot chocolate, thick and dark, and she wrapped both hands around it and felt the warmth move up through her palms, and she thought stupidly that her father would have liked this place. She sat on a bar stool and watched what happened next, and what happened next was something she had no category for, something that didn't fit inside any story she'd ever read or been told. Men came up to her one at a time or in pairs, setting money on the bar in front of her. Bills, mostly 20s and 50s, and a few hundreds folded or rolled, or just flat and loose. One man set down a personal check, and she looked at it, and the number he'd written in the amount box was $2,000, and she looked up at him, and he shrugged with one shoulder and said, "I don't carry that much cash." Another man dropped a wad of bills that had been rubber banded together and said without explanation, "From all of us in the back, we took a collection." A third man, old with white hair and a beard that reached his collar, set down $300 in 20s, one bill at a time, slowly like he was counting them out for himself as much as for her. Each time Lily said thank you. She said it every single time, looking them in the eye because her mother had raised her to do that, and she was not going to stop doing it now just because the world had gone slightly unreal around her. Axe stood nearby watching. He wasn't directing anything anymore. It was all moving on its own now. At some point, she wasn't sure exactly when, Because time had done something strange and elastic, a man named Big Dave, who had arms like bridge cables and a tattoo on his neck that she tried not to stare at, sat down on the stool next to her. He was enormous in a way that should have been threatening, and wasn't, because his voice when he spoke to her was careful and low, and he held his coffee mug in both hands like he wasn't sure what else to do with him. "I knew your daddy," he said. "Rode with him for 4 years before he settled down." "Did he ride a lot?" she asked. "Every weekend he could. Man loved that bike more than he stopped." "Well, almost more than anything." He looked at her sideways. "You look like him. Around the eyes." "My mama says that too." Big Dave nodded and looked back at his coffee. "She a fighter, your mama?" "The hardest kind," Lily said without hesitation. He nodded again more slowly. "Good. She's gonna need to be." He said it not unkindly, just the way someone says a true thing, and Lily didn't flinch at it because she already knew it was true. The count at the bar had been growing. A man, Lily later learned, was the club's treasurer, a compact, precise-looking man named Denny, who wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, had been moving through the room with a cigar box collecting. He came back to the bar and set the box down and counted it out in front of Axe with quick, practiced hands. Lily watched his lips move. She saw him finish counting. She saw him look at Axe. 38,400, Denny said. Lily's breath left her body. Axe looked at her. "That's," she started. "Not enough yet," Axe said flatly. Then he reached into his own jacket and pulled out a folded envelope and set it on top of the pile. 5,000. That puts us over 43. Nobody in the room made a sound, but something shifted. Something in the air and the posture of every man standing there. Some collective holding and then releasing of breath, some acknowledgement too large for words. Lily stared at the envelope. "That's more than enough," she said. "That covers everything. The hospital, the rent, the prescription, the electric, that covers everything." "Good," Axe said. She looked at him. "Why?" she asked, not ungratefully, genuinely. "Why would you do this?" "You don't know us. You haven't seen us in years." Axe pulled a stool over and sat down across from her and folded his arms on the bar. "Let me ask you something," he said. "If your daddy had been the one sitting in that bar tonight and one of his brothers walked in with his little girl who walked 8 miles in the dark, what would Ryan Harper have done?" Lily didn't have to think about it. He'd have emptied his pockets. "Every last cent," Axe said. "And then he'd have called in every favor he had. And then he'd have driven that man home himself." He paused. "We're not doing anything your father wouldn't have done. We're just doing it for his kid instead of for him. That's not generosity. That's just following through." She wanted to say something to that. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. There was nothing adequate, and she was not going to insult it by reaching for something small. "Now," Axe said in a different tone, practical, forwards-leaning, "tell me everything. The hospital, the landlord, the pharmacy, names, amounts, locations, all of it." So she told him. She pulled the folded piece of notebook paper out of her pocket, the one with the column of numbers she'd added up 3 times at her desk that afternoon, and she smoothed it flat on the bar and walked him through it. She was methodical about it, the way she was methodical about everything, because that was who she was, a kid who dealt with impossible things by making lists and adding them up until they became, at least in theory, manageable. Axe listened. Denny listened and wrote things down on a small notepad. 2 other men listened from nearby, leaning in, and one of them was already on his phone talking to someone saying, "Collin County Medical Center Billing Department," and writing something on his hand with a Sharpie. It was at this point, while Lily was explaining in the back rent to the landlord, a man named Garrett, who ran the Pine Ridge Trailer Park, and who had given them 2 extensions already, and had said gently but firmly that 2 was all he had in him, that the door to the bar opened. Not the front door, the side door, and the woman who walked in was not what anyone expected. She was maybe 60, white-haired, small, wearing a fleece jacket and carrying a casserole dish covered in foil, and she walked straight to the bar like she owned the floor and set the casserole dish down next to Lily's hot chocolate and said, "I heard there was a situation. I brought food." The man closest to her, Big Dave, stared at her. "Betty, how did you even—" "My son called me. He said there was a little girl here who'd walked 8 miles and hadn't eaten." Betty looked at Lily. Have you eaten, sweetheart? Lily thought about the chicken soup from earlier. I had dinner, she said. Before 8 o'clock, Betty said in the tone of someone who knew all the facts already. It's almost midnight. She peeled back the foil on the casserole, and the smell that came out was enough to make the whole room shift. Beef stew, rich and deep, the kind that had been cooking for hours. Eat. Lily ate. She ate and listened and watched as the room around her reorganized itself into something she had no word for. Men who had been strangers 4 hours ago were now making phone calls on her behalf, writing down addresses, passing her mother's information between them with the quiet efficiency of people who knew how to handle logistics under pressure. One of them, a man named Coop Young, maybe 25, who had the most earnest face Lily had ever seen on someone that size, had a cousin who worked at Collin County Medical and said he could get someone in the billing department on the phone even at this hour because the billing supervisor owed him. From what? Someone asked. From a thing, Coop said in a tone that closed the subject. The cousin came through. By 12:15, Coop had someone from the hospital's billing office on speaker, and Axe took the phone and spoke to them in a tone that was polite and immovable, and that left absolutely no room for misunderstanding. The bill would be paid in full the following morning. He needed confirmation that Grace Harper's treatment would not be interrupted and would resume on schedule. He needed that in writing. There was a pause on the other end of the phone. Then the voice said, I can send you a confirmation email. Do that, Axe said, and gave Denny's email address and handed the phone back to Coop. Lily had been watching all of this from her stool eating Betty's stew, and she was doing the things she did when life got bigger than her ability to process it. She was very calm on the outside and very loud on the inside, watching cataloging, filing things away for later, when she could take them out and look at them properly. But then Axe turned back to her and said, We're going to ride with you. She looked at him. What? When we take you home, we're riding with you, all of us. He said it the way he said everything, not as an offer, not as a question, as a fact that had already been decided and was simply being reported. Your mother should know who's doing this and why, and we want to see her. Lily's calm cracked a little then. Not all the way, just a hairline, the kind you can see if you know where to look. She thought about her mother asleep in that trailer, breathing that thin, ragged breath, not knowing her daughter had walked 8 miles in the dark and not knowing that $43,000 was now sitting in a cigar box 3 feet away. She thought about what Grace Harper's face was going to look like when she saw those bikes pulling into Pine Ridge. She thought about what her father would have thought watching his brothers ride for his wife. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. Axe nodded. He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, the way people look at things they want to remember. Then he straightened up and turned to the room and said in a voice that carried all the way to the walls, We ride at 12:30. Anyone who's sober and on a bike, you're coming. Anyone who's not sober, you're going home, and you're figuring out a different way to show up tomorrow. We clear. The room said yes, not in words, in the scrape of stools and the jingle of keys and the sound of boots moving toward the door. Big Dave put a hand on Lily's shoulder very briefly, just a touch. You doing okay? He asked. She looked up at him. I'm scared about my mama, she said honestly. She's going to be so upset when she finds out I left. Big Dave thought about this. Probably, he said. Yeah, she'll be upset. He paused, and then she'll look out the window and see 400 motorcycles in her parking lot, and she'll probably forget to stay upset. Lily almost laughed. She didn't quite make it, but it was close. Come on, he said. Axe wants you up front. She climbed down from the stool. Betty had already wrapped the rest of the stew in foil and pressed it into her arms, saying, For your mother. And Lily held it against her chest because it was warm. She walked toward the door, through a room that was emptying, fast, men moving with purpose, pulling on jackets and helmets, talking in low voices that weren't quiet, so much as concentrated all that energy channeled into one direction. She pushed through the door, and the cold hit her again, but it felt different this time. It was the same cold, same wind, same starless January sky. But she was walking out of that bar with $43,000 in a cigar box and a casserole dish of stew and the promise of 400 motorcycles behind her, and the cold felt like something she could walk through because she had already done it once and she had not quit. Harpers don't quit. She heard the engines starting one by one, filling the night with noise, deep and rhythmic and enormous, and she walked to where Axe was standing beside his Harley, and she looked up at him. "Will you call them first?" she asked. "Before we pull in, so she doesn't, so she's not scared when she hears them." Axe looked at her with that expression. She was starting to recognize the one that said she had surprised him again, that she kept doing things that he hadn't expected from a 9-year-old, that he was recalibrating every few minutes. "You got a neighbor who can go knock on her door. Let her know you're coming home safe." "Mrs. Purvis," Lily said immediately. "She lives 2 trailers down. She has a phone." "You know the number, by heart." He handed her his phone. She dialed. It rang 4 times. 5. Then a sleepy, alarmed voice said, "Hello, who is this?" "Mrs. Purvis, it's Lily Harper. I'm sorry to wake you up. I need you to go knock on my mama's door and tell her I'm coming home safe and I'm bringing some people with me." She paused. "A lot of people." A silence on the other end. "Lily," Mrs. Purvis said carefully, "where are you?" "I'm at Big Earl's bar on Route 9, Lily said. "And please don't worry about that part. Just please go tell my mama I'm okay. Tell her I'm coming home." Another silence longer. Then, "I'll go right now." "Thank you, Mrs. Purvis." She handed the phone back to Axe. He was looking at her with something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite awe and was, she thought, some mix of both that didn't have a name. "Ready," he said. She looked out at the parking lot at the long, glittering, rumbling line of motorcycles stretching back into the dark engines, alive headlights cutting through the January night, and she thought of her mother asleep in that trailer with the thin blanket pulled up to her shoulders, and she thought of her father's key in her pocket, and she thought of the cigar box full of money that Denny was holding, and she thought of $43,000 and a casserole dish and 400 men who had not hesitated for a single second. "Ready," she said. Axe's Harley was the first one out of the parking lot, and Lily sat behind him with the casserole dish balanced across her knees and her arms around his jacket, and the cold hit her face like a wall the moment they pulled onto Route 9. But she didn't close her eyes. She kept them open the whole ride, watching the road unfold in front of the headlight, watching the dark fields on either side blur past, feeling the road underneath them. And behind them, was a sound she would spend the rest of her life trying to describe to people who hadn't been there. It was not just noise. It was mass. It was weight. It was 400 engine running in the same direction at the same time, a sound so deep and physical, you didn't only hear it, you felt it in your chest, in your teeth, in the marrow of your bones. She turned once to look back, and the headlights went on so far behind her that she couldn't see the end of them. A river of light stretching back down Route 9 as far as the dark would let her see. She turned back around and faced forward. 8 miles going back felt nothing like 8 miles going out. Going out, it had been just her and the flashlight and the cold and the counting. Coming back, it was this enormous breathing rumbling thing moving through the Texas night, and she was at the front of it, and her father's key was in her pocket, and she pressed her chin down against the wind and held on. They heard Pine Ridge before they reached it, or rather Pine Ridge heard them. Lights were coming on in the trailers as they turned into the park, 1 window, then 2, then a whole row of them going yellow in the dark. Lily saw curtains move. She saw a door open and a man step out in his undershirt and stare. She saw Mrs. Purvis standing in front of her trailer, with her robe pulled tight around her and her hand pressed flat against her chest, her mouth open in an expression that was somewhere between astonishment and religious experience. Axe cut the engine. The bikes behind him went quiet in a wave, each row going silent in sequence, like dominoes falling in reverse until the whole park was holding its breath. And in that new silence, the door to the Harper trailer opened. Grace stood in the doorway. She was in her robe, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other pressed to her mouth. Her eyes found Lily immediately, mother eyes, the kind that can locate a child across any distance, in any crowd, in any amount of darkness. And for one long, suspended second, that was all there was. Grace and Lily looking at each other across the cold, quiet dark of that parking lot. Then Grace said, "Lily Marie Harper." Her voice came out low and thin and tight, the way voices get when all the emotion in a person is trying to come through a space too small for it. "Hi, Mama," Lily said. Grace came down the steps. She was not steady on her feet. She was never fully steady anymore. And Lily was already off the bike and moving toward her, and they met in the middle of the gravel lot. And Grace went to her knees and pulled her daughter against her chest, and she held her the way people hold things. They thought they'd lost, both arms wrapped all the way around her face, pressed into Lily's shoulder, her whole body shaking. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just held on. Lily held on back. The casserole dish was still in one hand. She felt her mother's ribs through the robe, how close together they were now, how little space there was between the bones and the surface, and she held on tighter. "You scared me half to death," Grace finally said, muffled into Lily's coat. "I woke up and you were gone. I didn't know." "I'm sorry, Mama. Don't you ever—" Grace pulled back and looked at her daughter's face, both hands cupping her cheeks, and her eyes were red, but her voice had gone fierce. "Don't you ever do something like this again. You hear me? You are 9 years old. I know. You could have been hurt. You could have been anything. Could have happened to you on that road. I know, Mama, I'm sorry." Grace stared at her, and then her eyes moved up past Lily and out across the parking lot where 400 motorcycles sat in the dark, and 400 men sat on them, quiet and still, not a one of them moving, just watching, giving this moment its space. Grace's breath left her in a long, slow exhale. "Lily," she said carefully. "Who are these people?" Axe stepped in forward. He moved the way he always moved, deliberate, unhurried, the kind of walk that says, "I'm not a threat, and I'm not going to pretend I'm smaller than I am." He stopped a few feet away and looked at Grace and took his helmet off and held it at his side. "My name is Axe," he said. "I rode with your husband for 6 years. He was one of the best men I have ever known." Grace looked at him. She hadn't let go of Lily. "You're from the club," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." A pause. Grace's jaw was tight. "Ryan always said—" She stopped, swallowed. "He always said you all were more family than most people get." "He was right," Axe said simply. "And your daughter came and found us tonight and reminded us what that means." Grace looked down at Lily. The expression on her face was something that didn't have a clean name. It was love and terror and fury and also all crammed into the same moment, the way only a mother can hold all those things at once and not come apart. "You walked 8 miles, Grace said. "I took the flashlight," Lily said. "You walked 8 miles in the dark to a biker bar." "Daddy used to take me there." Grace made a sound that was half laugh and half sob and pulled her daughter back against her. Over Lily's head, she looked at Axe. "How much?" she asked. Her voice was very quiet. "Whatever she offered, whatever she said she'd give you." "She didn't give us anything," Axe said. "The bike stays where it is." Grace went still. "I don't understand." Denny stepped forward from behind Axe. He was holding the cigar box, and he set it on the hood of the nearest truck and opened the lid, and Grace looked at it and then looked away and then slowly looked back. $43,400, Denny said. "Cash and check. Plus I have a confirmation email from the billing office at Collin County Medical that your account will be settled in full tomorrow morning and your treatment will not be interrupted." The silence that followed was total. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Grace's hand was still on Lily's back. Lily could feel it there, feel the slight tremor in it, feel her mother trying to hold herself together the way she always held herself together, because Grace Harper had spent 11 months being strong in front of her daughter, and she was not sure she remembered how to stop. "I can't accept this," Grace said. "Mama." "Lily, I cannot. This is too much. We cannot accept this from people we barely know." Her voice shook on the last word. She looked at Axe. "I appreciate what you're trying to do. I do. But I will not take charity. We will find another way." The words landed in the cold air and sat there. Axe looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." Grace looked at him. "If Ryan were alive right now," Axe said, "and one of his brothers showed up here with his wife sick and his kid making the hard decisions, what would Ryan Harper have done?" Grace's mouth opened. Then it closed. "He'd have given every dollar he had," she said. Her voice had gone very small. "And he'd have been angry if they refused," Axe said. Grace looked down at Lily. Lily looked back up at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Lily said, "I didn't sell Daddy's bike, Mama. I want you to know that. I tried to, but they wouldn't let me." Grace let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep and exhausted inside her. She reached up and touched her daughter's face just once, a gentle press of her palm against Lily's cheek. "You tried to sell it," she said softly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Grace's voice was barely audible. "Don't you dare be sorry." She straightened up. She pulled her robe tighter. She looked at Axe with eyes that were red and full but steady, and when she spoke, her voice was the voice of a woman who had been bent as far as a person can bend without breaking, and had chosen in this moment not to break. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know what else to say to you. I don't think there are enough words." "There don't need to be words," Axe said. From somewhere in the middle of the assembled bikes, a man called out, "Mrs. Harper, we've got more." A pause. "The rent, the pharmacy. Coop already called the Walgreens on 4th. Your prescription will be ready at 8 tomorrow morning. It's paid." Grace blinked. "And the landlord," another voice said, this one belonging to a broad-shouldered man in the second row who had the careful accountant-like manner of someone who had spent a lifetime cleaning up other people's messes. "What's his name and number? We'll call tonight." "It's the middle of the night," Grace said faintly. "That's fine," the man said. "We'll leave a message." Mrs. Purvis materialized at Grace's elbow, appearing the way small, determined women appear in crises, suddenly completely as if she had always been there. "Grace," she said quietly, "let them help you." She put a hand on Grace's arm. "I have seen you struggle for 11 months, and I have watched you refuse every hand that came your way because you didn't want to owe anyone anything. And I understand that. Lord knows I understand it. But this isn't debt. Look at these people." Grace looked. 400 men, some of them old, some young, some with families of their own, visible in the photos on their jacket patches, some clearly coming from very different places in life, but all of them sitting in the same cold parking lot at 1 in the morning for the same reason. And every single one of them was looking at her with the same expression. Not pity, not condescension, nothing that would have made her back go straight, just presence. The expression of people who have shown up and intend to stay. "They're not strangers," Mrs. Purvis said. "They're your husband's people." Grace looked at Axe. He met her gaze and waited. He was good at that, she could tell, at waiting without pressure, at giving people the space to arrive at their own decisions. "Okay," Grace said. It came out so quietly it was almost not a sound, but Axe heard it. He nodded once. Then he turned to the crowd and something in his posture shifted, a loosening, a settling, like a tension that had been held, was finally released, and the crowd seemed to feel it too because the silence broke all at once, and men started climbing off their bikes and moving and talking, and the parking lot of Pine Ridge Trailer Park came alive in a way that it almost certainly never had and almost certainly never would again. Someone had brought food. More than Betty's casserole, there were boxes from a 24-hour diner 3 towns over that 3 men had apparently detoured to pick up on the way, which meant they had made that call while still at the bar, which meant they had been planning this since before they even left. There were folding chairs appearing from truck beds. Someone had a generator and a string of lights and was matter-of-factly running an extension cord. Lily stood in the middle of all of it and watched. She watched Big Dave shake hands with Mr. Garrett, the landlord who had appeared from the far end of the park in his pajamas and his boots drawn by the noise, and who stood listening to Big Dave with his mouth increasingly open, and then slowly nodding and then nodding more, and then reaching out and taking the envelope that Big Dave offered and looking at it and saying something that Lily couldn't hear, but that made Big Dave put a hand on his shoulder. She watched Denny sit down at their kitchen table with a cigar box and a notepad and walk her mother through every single bill, line by line, explaining what was paid and what was pending and what would be handled tomorrow. She watched her mother sit across from him with her hands folded on the table, listening, and she watched the expression on Grace's face change incrementally from overwhelmed to comprehending to something that looked cautiously like relief. She watched Mrs. Purvis accept a cup of coffee from a young biker with a nose ring and thank him with the complete sincerity of someone who has never once in her life been too proud to accept a cup of coffee. She watched all of it and felt the particular exhaustion of 9-year-olds who have been running on pure will for hours finally start to creep in. Around the edges, felt it in her legs first, and then her eyes heavy and slow. Axe found her sitting on the bottom step of the trailer, her chin in her hands, fighting sleep. He sat down next to her. He didn't say anything right away. He just sat there the way adults sit with kids when they understand that the kid has done something enormous and is now coming down from it. You should sleep, he said eventually. Not yet, she said. Why not? She thought about it. I want to make sure everything's actually happening, she said. I want to see all of it. He looked at her sideways. You don't trust us. I trust you, she said immediately. She paused. She was 9 and she was exhausted, and she was going to have to find the honest words for something complicated. I've been the one holding everything together for a long time, and when you're the one holding it, it's hard to put it down, even when someone offers. Axe was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Your daddy had the same problem. Lily looked up at him. He did. Man could not ask for help to save his life. He said it with affection, not criticism. Proud in the best way and the worst way at the same time. Sound familiar? She considered this. Mama's the same. Apple doesn't fall far, Axe said. A long, comfortable pause. The noise of the parking lot moved around them warm, despite the cold full of voices and boots on gravel and the smell of coffee and engine oil. Can I ask you something? Lily said. Go ahead. Do you have kids? Something moved across his face, quick, complicated, a door opening and closing. Had a daughter, he said. She passed. Long time ago. Lily looked at him. I'm sorry. Thank you, he said. Simple, no deflection, no rush to move past it. He sat with that for a moment the way he sat with everything fully, without apology. How old was she? Lily asked. He looked at her. 8, he said. Almost 9. The number settled between them. Lily felt the weight of it without fully understanding it, the way children sometimes understand adult pain, not with their minds, but with something older and quieter. She didn't say anything. She put her small hand over his large one on the step between them. Just for a second, just a brief warm pressure, and then she took it back. Axe looked down at where her hand had been. He cleared his throat. Your daddy used to talk about you all the time, he said. Every ride, every meetup. Lily did this, Lily said that. Man was embarrassing about it, honestly. He shook his head slowly. He'd tell you you were going to be something else, something the world hadn't seen yet. Lily's chest hurt. It was not a bad hurt exactly, or not only a bad hurt, it was the kind that comes when you love someone who is gone, and someone tells you that the love went both ways and still does, that it lives on in the people who carry it. I miss him, she said. So do we, Axe said, every single day. From inside the trailer, Lily heard her mother's voice say something, and then laugh, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind she hadn't heard in months. She turned toward the sound instinctively, the way she always turned toward it. Then from inside Denny's voice, Mrs. Harper, I want to show you something. A pause. The hospital called back. They've not only confirmed the account settlement, they've also flagged your file for a review of your ongoing treatment plan with the senior oncologist. That means next week they'll be looking at options they may not have explored yet. Lily stood up from the step. What does that mean? She heard her mother ask. It means, Denny said that sometimes when an account moves from delinquent to paid in full overnight, people take a second look at a case. And sometimes a second look finds things. It doesn't guarantee anything. But it opens a door that was closed before. Silence from inside. Then her mother said very quietly, oh, just that one word. But it was a word that held everything, all the months of doors closing and options running out and prayers going into the dark without an answer. And what it held now was different. What it held now was the beginning. The barest beginning of something Lily hadn't heard in her mother's voice in almost a year. Hope. Lily stood on that bottom step with her hand on the doorframe and her father's key in her pocket and the cold air on her face, and she listened to that single syllable, and she thought, I did not know this would happen. I walked 8 miles and I did not know if anything would happen at all. I only knew that doing nothing was the one thing I could not do. She thought Harpers don't quit. She thought, no, they don't. Behind her, Axe had stood up too, and she could feel him there without turning around, that large, steady presence that had somehow, in the space of 4 hours, become one of the most familiar things in her world. Go inside, he said. Go be with your mama. What about all this? She gestured out at the parking lot. We're not going anywhere, he said. We'll be here when you wake up." She turned and looked at him. She needed to say something, needed to find something adequate for all of this, for him, for all of them, and she knew already that she was going to come up short because some things are bigger than what language was built for. "My daddy picked good people," she said finally. Axe looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight, his eyes were bright. "He picked a good family too," he said. She pushed open the door and went inside, and the warmth of the trailer wrapped around her like a hand, and she walked to the kitchen table where her mother sat across from Denny, with the papers spread between them, and she pulled a chair close and sat down next to Grace, and Grace reached out without looking and took her hand and held it and didn't let go. Lily fell asleep at the kitchen table. She didn't mean to. One moment she was listening to Denny explain something about the hospital's payment confirmation, and Grace's hand was warm around hers, and the voices of the men outside were a low, constant hum through the walls. And then the next moment, Grace was shaking her shoulder gently and saying her name, and she lifted her head from her arms and realized she had been out cold for she didn't know how long, and there was a blanket around her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Come on, baby Kane," Grace said. "Bed. I need to. Everything is handled. Come on." She was too tired to argue. She let her mother walk her to the back room, and she lay down still in her coat and her shoes, and Grace pulled the blanket up over her and sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her hair the way she used to when Lily was very small, before the illness, before everything, that slow, even rhythm, that was better than any medicine. "You're going to be in so much trouble tomorrow," Grace said softly. "I know," Lily said into the pillow. "The biggest trouble of your entire life." "I know, Mama." Grace's hand kept moving. "I am so proud of you, I can hardly stand it." Lily was asleep before the sentence finished. She woke to light and noise and the smell of coffee, so strong it came through the wall, and for one brief, disoriented moment, she thought she was somewhere else, somewhere bigger, somewhere full of people, and then she remembered and sat up fast. The clock on the shelf said 7:42. She pushed the blanket off and stood up, and her feet still ached from the night before, and she walked to the window and looked out, and her breath stopped in her chest. They were still there. Not all 400, the street was too small for that, and she understood that most of them had gone home in the small hours because they had booze and families and lives. But there were still at least 30 bikes in the lot, and she could count at least 20 men moving around or sitting in folding chairs or standing in clusters with coffee cups, and a few of them had clearly just arrived because they were still in their helmets, and the whole thing had the comfortable, established feeling of people who had decided they were somewhere and had not yet decided they were leaving. She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass. She went to find her mother. Grace was at the kitchen table again, but the table looked different. The stack of red-lettered papers was gone. In its place was a single notepad with Denny's careful handwriting all over it, and a mug of actual tea, real tea, the good kind that smelled like something, and Grace was sitting straight, her back not touching the chair the way she sat when she was fully present, fully herself, not managing pain or managing exhaustion, but just there. She looked up when Lily came in. "Sit down," she said. "I need to talk to you." Lily sat. She folded her hands on the table the way her mother did, mirroring without thinking about it. Grace looked at her for a long moment. "First thing, she said, what you did last night was dangerous and reckless, and you are never ever to do anything like it again. You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." "You walked 8 miles on a state highway in the dark, alone, at 9 years old." Grace's voice was steady, but her eyes were doing something else. "If anything had happened to you, so..." "I know, Mama. I don't think you do. I don't think you can at your age." She took a breath. "But I also know why you did it. And I know that you are the reason that I am sitting here this morning with all the bills paid and a confirmation email from the hospital and a prescription at Walgreens that somebody already picked up." She paused. "Coop picked it up at 6:30 this morning. He drove 20 minutes each way." Lily blinked. "He didn't have to do that." "No," Grace agreed. "He didn't." A knock at the door. Grace said, "Come in," and Axe opened it and stood in the doorway holding 2 coffee cups, and he held one out toward Grace with the particular courtesy of someone who knows they're in someone else's home and is behaving accordingly. "Brought this from the machine outside," he said. "Mrs. Purvis says the good coffee will be ready in 10 minutes." Grace took the cup. "Sit down, please." He sat at the table across from both of them, and for a moment the three of them were quiet together, in the way that people are quiet after a long night when the urgency has passed and what's left is real and unhurried. The oncologist's office called this morning, Grace said to Axe. At 7, I almost didn't pick up because I didn't recognize the number. She set down the mug. They want to schedule a full review. A senior doctor wants to look at my case personally. Axe nodded. Denny mentioned they might. He said sometimes when an account moves to paid people, take a second look. Grace looked at her hands. I looked it up this morning. The senior oncologist at Collin County, Dr. Patricia Okoye, she has a specialty in the kind of cancer I have. I didn't know that. My case had never been assigned to her because of, she stopped, because of the billing situation. Cases and collections get routed differently. The silence that followed was very full. Lily looked at her mother. What does that mean, she asked. Practically. It means, Grace said carefully, that I may have been receiving treatment from a doctor who was not the most qualified person to treat what I have, and that the most qualified person is now going to look at my file. She paused. It doesn't mean anything is certain, but Dr. Okoye's office said she has had good outcomes with late-stage cases that other physicians had. She stopped again, pressed her lips together, that other physicians hadn't been optimistic about. The word late stage landed on the table between them and sat there. Lily had heard it before, but it hit differently in the morning light, differently now that she was fully awake and not running on adrenaline, differently when her mother said it plainly instead of around it. Axe set his coffee down. His voice was quiet. When's the appointment? Next Thursday, Grace said. We'll drive you, he said, just like that. No deliberation. Grace looked at him. You don't have to do that. No, he agreed, but we're going to. Grace opened her mouth and then closed it. She had clearly been preparing to refuse gracefully the way she refused everything gracefully, and Axe had not given her the runway for it. She looked at Lily, who looked back at her, and something passed between them. The look that mothers and daughters exchange when the same thought arrives at the same time, and Grace turned back to Axe and said simply, thank you. He nodded. Another knock at the door, and this one was more tentative, a lighter hand. Grace said, come in, and it was not one of the bikers. It was Mr. Garrett, the landlord, still in yesterday's clothes, holding his hat with both hands, the way men hold their hats when they're about to say something that costs them something. Morning, Grace, he said. He looked at Lily. Morning, Lily. Morning, Mr. Garrett, Lily said. He cleared his throat. I'm not here about the money, he said quickly. That's settled, and I want you to know I'm grateful for how it was handled, and I'm sorry it came to where it did. He rotated the hat in his hands. I'm here because I've been doing some thinking since about midnight, and I want to tell you something. Grace waited. I should have worked harder on the county assistance program for you 6 months ago, he said. There's a medical hardship exemption that can reduce your rent for up to 24 months for residents facing documented illness. I knew about it, and I didn't push it through because I thought you'd turn it down and I didn't want the confrontation. He met Grace's eyes. That was cowardice on my part, I'm sorry. The kitchen was very quiet. I filed the paperwork this morning, Garrett continued, and online. It takes about 2 weeks to process, but if it goes through, and it should, your case is exactly what it's designed for. Your rent will drop to 40% of what it is now for 2 years. Grace stared at him. Mr. Garrett, you don't need to say anything, he said. I just needed to say it. He put his hat back on. You're a good tenant. Always have been. You don't deserve what the last year's been. He nodded once to Axe and to Lily, and then he left, closing the door quietly behind him. The three of them sat there. Lily looked at her mother. Grace was looking at the closed door with the expression of someone who was revising in real time a story they had told themselves about how the world works. 40%, Lily said, just to hear it out loud. 40%, Grace confirmed. From outside came the sound of more engines arriving, not leaving arriving, and Lily stood up and went to look and saw 3 pickups pulling into the lot and men getting out of them carrying things, and it took her a moment to figure out what the things were. Tools. They were carrying tools, toolboxes and lumber, and what looked like a roll of insulation, and 3 men already walking the perimeter of the lot, studying the trailers and with the focused look of people who had come to work. What is that? Grace said from behind her. Axe's voice came from the doorway. I made some calls last night. A few of the guys in the chapter do contracting. I asked them to take a look at your heating situation. A pause. If you're comfortable with it. Grace turned around slowly. You're going to fix our heat. If the problem is what I think it is, it should take a couple hours, Axe said. Ducts are probably cracked. It's a common problem in these units, and it's a cheap fix if you know what you're doing. He paused again. You've been cold all winter. Grace put her hand over her mouth. She stood there for a moment with her hand pressed over her mouth and her eyes very bright, and Lily watched her mother hold herself together by sheer force of the will that had always held her together, and then the will ran out just a little and Grace sat back down in her chair and put her face in her hands. Not crying, just resting, putting down the weight for a moment, letting herself be held by the chair in the room and the unexpected enormous kindness of all of it. Lily sat next to her. She put her hand on her mother's back. After a long moment, Grace raised her head. Her eyes were red, but her voice when it came out was steady. Your father, she said to the room to Axe, to no one in particular. He used to say that the people in his club were the most decent people he knew. I used to think he was being sentimental. He wasn't, Axe said. No, Grace said. He wasn't. The contractors were inside within the hour. They were not subtle about it. They filled the small trailer with their voices and their tools and their presence, and the one who seemed to be in charge, a man named Hector, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, kept up a running commentary on what he was finding that was half diagnosis and half outrage. This duct tape right here, Hector said, crouching in the narrow hallway with his flashlight, has been holding this joint together since approximately 1987. It is not doing the job anymore. With respect, it has not been doing the job for quite some time. How bad is it? Grace asked. Bad enough that I'm surprised you've had any heat at all, he said. He looked back over his shoulder. You've been losing probably 60% of your heated air into the walls. Everything you've been paying for 60% is just gone. He shook his head. We're going to fix all of it, and we're going to add some insulation to the front wall while we're here because it is fighting a losing battle. Grace looked at Lily. Lily looked at Grace. You understand, Grace said to Hector carefully, that we can't pay for this right now, even with everything that's happened. Already handled, Hector said without looking up from the duct joint. Axe called it in last night. Labor is free. Materials were donated by a supply company that owes Axe a favor from about 3 years back. He paused. Apparently Axe is owed a lot of favors. From the other room, Axe said, I heard that. It was a compliment, Hector said. Lily stepped outside to get out of the way while the work happened and found herself standing in a parking lot that had become overnight a community. Big Dave was there sitting in a folding chair with a cup of coffee, and next to him was Mrs. Purvis, who had apparently decided that her proximity to events made her an unofficial member of the proceedings, and she was telling Big Dave about the time she had taught second grade for 30 years and was approaching the topic with the intensity of someone who had strong opinions. Big Dave was listening with complete attention. Either he was genuinely interested or he was very good at appearing so, and either way Lily liked him for it. Coop appeared at her elbow. He had a paper bag in his hand. Breakfast burrito, he said. From the place on 5th. You like eggs? I love eggs, Lily said. Good. He handed it over. There are more in the truck if your mom wants. She took the burrito and sat down on the step and ate it and watched the morning happen around her. Men she barely knew moved through the lot with coffee and conversation. The sound of Hector's work came muffled through the walls. Mrs. Purvis had moved on from teaching second grade and was now explaining to Big Dave something about the water pressure in trailer parks, which Big Dave was receiving with the same complete attention. It was such an ordinary morning in all the small ways and such an extraordinary one in all the large ones, and Lily sat in the middle of it eating her breakfast burrito and felt the particular ache of someone who understands that a moment is important before it is finished happening. Then Coop's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it. His voice dropped, immediately went low and careful in a way that made Lily look up. She watched his back, the slight tension that came into his shoulders, the way his free hand went to the back of his neck. He talked for about 2 minutes. Then he hung up and stood very still for a moment. Coop, Lily said, what is it? He turned around. His face was doing something complicated. That was my cousin, he said. The one at the hospital. What did she say? He looked toward the trailer door and then back at Lily. She said Dr. Okoye pulled your mom's file last night. Not this morning, last night, after the call came through about the account. He paused. She said the doctor sat with it for 2 hours. Lily stood up. The burrito was still in her hand, but gone. Shinde Coop took a breath and she said, and my cousin is not supposed to be telling me this, so this goes nowhere, you understand. She said that Dr. Okoye flagged the file. That there are 2 clinical trials running right now, one at Collin County and one at UT Southwestern, and your mom's case profile matches the criteria for both of them. He looked at her. Lily, clinical trials are free. They're fully funded by the research, and they're testing treatments that aren't available to regular patients yet. The parking lot was going about its business around them, and nobody else was listening, and Lily stood there with a breakfast burrito in her hand and felt the ground shift under her feet in a way that was not frightening. Is she going to tell my mom? Lily asked. Thursday, Coop said. At the appointment. My cousin says Dr. Okoye will present it as her own discovery, which technically it is, but… He stopped. Lily, she was never going to see this doctor. Not with the billing situation the way it was. The right person was never going to look at her file. Lily understood what he was not saying. She understood it fully and immediately, and it hit her the way things hit you when they're too large for the part of your brain that processes normal-sized things, and she had to put the breakfast burrito down on the step because her hands were not quite steady. So, she said slowly, if I hadn't walked to the bar last night, nobody would have paid the bill, Coop said simply. The account would have stayed in collections. Her file would have stayed in the pile. Dr. Okoye would never have seen it. He held her gaze. You understand what I'm saying to you. She understood. She understood that she had walked 8 miles in the dark, not knowing what would happen, only knowing she could not do nothing, and that in doing so she had pulled a thread that had pulled another thread, that had pulled another, and that somewhere in the middle of all that pulling, something had shifted that was larger than any of them had intended. She thought about her father. She thought about his voice. Harper's don't quit. She went back inside. Her mother was at the kitchen table again with Axe and Denny, and a third man. She hadn't met, a man with quiet eyes who turned out to be a retired attorney named Frank, who had spent 20 years doing medical billing disputes and who had been on the phone since 6 in the morning talking to people at the hospital. Grace looked up when Lily came in. There you are. I need to tell you something, Lily said. Grace looked at her and, Coop's cousin works at the hospital. She said it carefully, building to it. She told him something that I think you need to know before Thursday. Grace went very still. Axe and Denny and Frank went quiet. Dr. Okoye looked at your file last night, Lily said, and she found something. Clinical trials. 2 of them. Mama, they're free, and they're testing things that regular patients don't get access to yet. The sound that came out of Grace Harper then was not a word. It was not a cry exactly and not a gasp. It was the sound a person makes when a door opens that they had accepted quietly and without drama was permanently closed. Axe stood up and stepped back from the table because this was not his moment. Frank stood up too. Denny picked up his notepad and moved toward the hallway, murmuring something about making a call. And Lily crossed the kitchen and sat down next to her mother, and Grace turned toward her and held her face in both hands the way she had held it the night before in the parking lot and looked at her for a long time without speaking. You did this, Grace said. We did it, Lily said. All of us. No. Grace shook her head very slightly. Her eyes were full but steady. You started it. You are 9 years old and you started something that… She stopped. She breathed. Your father would not believe you. He would absolutely not believe you. He'd be sitting here trying not to cry and pretending he had something in his eye. Lily laughed. It came out wet and surprised and real. He really would, she said. He really would, Grace agreed. And for just a moment in that cold little kitchen that was slowly getting warmer, as Hector worked his way through the ducts, the 3 of them were there together, Grace and Lily, and the memory of Ryan Harper, which was not a ghost or a sadness, but something more solid than either the presence of a man who had loved his people so well that even 4 years gone, that love was still doing its work in the world. From outside came the sound of more engines arriving, more men, more of Ryan Harper's people showing up the way they always showed up for their own. Grace straightened. wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, put her shoulders back. Okay, she said. I need to get dressed. I'm not sitting in my robe while 40 people fix my house. Mama, hand me my mug. Grace stood up from the table slower than Lily wished she moved, but steadier than she had moved in months. She took the mug of tea and held it and looked at her daughter with an expression that was somewhere between fierceness and something softer than anything Lily had a name for. I love you, Grace said. You know that. I know, Lily said, and you are still in the biggest trouble of your life. I know that too, Lily said. Grace went to get dressed, and Lily sat alone at the kitchen table for just a moment with the morning light coming in and the sound of tools working through the walls and the low conversation of men outside who had chosen without being asked to make themselves part of this, and she put her hand flat on the table where the stack of red-lettered bills had been, and she felt the plain wooden surface under her palm clean and empty, and she thought that sometimes clearing a table is the most important thing in the world. Hector finished the heating work at 11:17 in the morning, and Lily knew the exact time because she was watching the clock on the microwave when the sound of tools stopped, and the silence that followed was different from regular silence. It was the silence of something completed. Something done right, and then a low hum started up from the vents that was so steady and warm and constant that Grace stood in the middle of the hallway and closed her eyes and just listened to it. That's what heat sounds like, Hector said from behind her, not unkindly. You probably forgot. Grace opened her eyes. How long has it been broken? She asked. The main joint, best I can tell, about 14 months. He said it without drama, just a fact. The secondary duct on the bedroom side was patched badly probably 2 winters ago, maybe 3. Whoever did it used the wrong tape, and it held for a while and then didn't. 14 months. Grace looked at Lily. Lily looked back. 14 months was almost exactly when the medical bills had started, when the money had gotten tight enough that calling a repairman had moved from the short list to the never list without anyone actually deciding it. Thank you, Grace said to Hector. She said it the way she said thank you to all of them fully, without qualification, without the old reflex to diminish the gift by apologizing for needing it. She had stopped doing that sometime in the last few hours. Lily had noticed. Hector waved it off and started packing his toolbox, and Grace turned back to the kitchen, and Lily followed her, and they sat down together at the table, and Grace wrapped both hands around her mug and was quiet for a moment. I have something to tell you, Grace said. Lily waited. I called Deborah this morning while you were outside. Grace looked at the mug. I told her everything. About last night, about the hospital, about Dr. Okoye. She paused. She cried for about 5 minutes, and then she said something that I've been thinking about since. What did she say? Grace looked up. She said, Grace, you have spent 11 months trying to protect Lily from all of this. And what you didn't see is that Lily has spent 11 months trying to protect you from all of it too. And you were both so busy protecting each other that neither of you let anyone in. The kitchen was very quiet. The vent hummed. Outside voices moved back and forth. Lily turned the words over. She understood them in the specific cellular way that true things land when you hear them at exactly the right moment, when they find the thing in you that already knew but hadn't found the words. She's not wrong, Lily said. No, Grace said. She's really not. She set the mug down. I want you to know something. I know you've been carrying things you shouldn't have had to carry. I know that you have been. She stopped. Her voice found its footing again. You have been more adult than any child should have to be, and that is partly the circumstances and partly who you are, and I am grateful for who you are every single day. But I need you to know that it is not your job to save me. That is not a job a 9-year-old should have. Lily looked at her mother. But what if I'm the only one who can? Grace held her gaze for a long moment. Last night, she said carefully, you walked into a bar full of strangers and you asked for help. That is not the same as carrying the weight yourself. Do you understand the difference? Lily thought about it, really thought about it. I didn't do it alone, she said slowly. You didn't do it alone, Grace confirmed. You did the hardest thing, which is ask, and then you let other people do the rest. She reached across the table and took Lily's hand. That is what I need to learn from you, not the other way around. The door opened and Axe leaned in. He had his jacket on road ready, and something in his posture said he was about to leave, not leaving but shifting, moving to the next thing. We're going to head out, he said. Give you your day back. Grace stood up. Wait. She crossed the kitchen and stopped in front of him and looked up at him. This large, scarred, careful man who had once called her husband brother, and she said, I want to know about him, about Ryan. The things I don't know, the things from before me, I want to hear them. Will you come back and tell me? Axe looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said, I'll come back. Sunday, she asked. Sunday, he said. Grace nodded. Then before either of them could think about it too long, she stepped forward and hugged him. It was brief and it was fierce. And Axe stood very still for a moment, and then his arms came up and he held on for just a second, the way people hold on when they're holding something they didn't know they needed. When Grace stepped back, she was composed. Axe cleared his throat. Thursday, he said. We'll be here at 8 for the appointment. We'll be ready, Grace said. Nishayat. He looked at Lily. You good? I'm good, she said. He held her gaze for one more moment, and in that moment she saw it again, what she had seen the night before, that private and complicated thing behind his eyes that had to do with his daughter, who had been 8 years old, and she held it gently the way you hold knowledge that belongs to someone else. Your daddy was right about you, Axe said. Then he turned and walked out, and the door closed quietly behind him. Grace stood in the middle of the kitchen with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, just breathing. You okay, Mama? Lily asked. Getting there, Grace said. The rest of the morning moved fast. Men filed out in 2s and 3s, some of them stopping to shake Grace's hand or nod at Lily or say things that were short and genuine and didn't require response. Big Dave hugged Mrs. Purvis goodbye with a formality that made both of them laugh and promised to bring his wife to meet her the following month. Coop stopped at the door and looked at Lily and said, Thursday, I'll be in the parking lot at the hospital if you need anything. You have got my number now. And she nodded and he left. Frank, the retired attorney, stayed the longest. He sat at the table with Grace for 20 minutes after everyone else had gone and walked her through 3 things: the medical hardship documentation she would need for the hospital going forward, the tenant assistance application that Garrett had filed, and what Grace could do to accelerate it, and a third thing, a patient advocacy service that he had apparently been connected to for years, which assisted families navigating medical billing disputes, in which he was calling on her behalf that afternoon. I should have known about all of this, Grace said when he finished, months ago. Most people don't, Frank said. He packed up his papers with the efficient movements of a man who had said this sentence many times. That's why the system works the way it does. Information is a resource, same as money. Controlling who has it controls outcomes. He looked at her over his glasses. You know now. After he left, the trailer was quiet for the first time since midnight. A real quiet, not the tense listening quiet that Lily had grown up inside, the quiet of waiting for the next bad thing, but something with space in it, something that had room to breathe. Grace sat down on the pull-out couch. She patted the cushion next to her, and Lily sat, and they were side by side the way they used to sit when Lily was very small, and they would watch something on how with a bowl of popcorn between them, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. Can I tell you what I was thinking about? Lily said finally. Walking here last night, on the road. Tell me, Grace said. I was thinking about Daddy. Specifically, I was thinking about what you always say, that he was the kind of person who walked toward things when everyone else walked away. She paused. And I thought, I'm his kid. That should mean something. Grace was very still next to her. And then I thought, Lily continued, that maybe the bravest thing wasn't walking to the bar. Maybe the bravest thing was knocking on the door. She looked at her mother. Because I could have turned around 100 times on that road, and I almost did. Twice. But I didn't knock on the door until I decided all the way. And that's when it got scary. Grace turned to look at her daughter. What was scary about it? Because once you knock, Lily said, it's not in your hands anymore. Someone else opens the door or they don't, and you can't control that. She paused. That's the thing about asking for help. You can't control what happens after. Grace was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful and full. I've been not knocking on doors for 11 months, she said, because I couldn't stand the idea that someone might not open them. I know, Mama. And here I am. Grace looked at the table, the clean, empty table where the bills had been. Every door opened. Lily leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. Grace put her arm around her. The vent hummed its steady, warm hum. Outside, the lot was quiet, the last engines long gone, the folding chairs folded back into truck beds, the extension cord and the string of lights taken down. Just the two of them, same as always. Except not the same at all. They stayed like that for a while, long enough that Lily felt herself starting to drift again, her body still catching up on a night's worth of adrenaline, and then Grace said, "I want to show you something." She stood up and went to the bedroom. Lily heard her moving around, heard the closet door open, heard the sound of something being moved from the top shelf. Then Grace came back holding the coffee can. She sat down and took the lid off and reached inside and took out the photograph Ryan Harper at 26 on his Harley, that enormous grin, and set it on the cushion between them. "I used to take this out every night when you were asleep," Grace said, "just to talk to him, tell him how the day went, tell him about you." She looked at the photo. "I stopped about 6 months ago. I told myself it was because I needed to look forward, not back. But really, I think I stopped because I was scared to tell him how bad things had gotten. Like he would be disappointed." Lily looked at her mother. "Mama, he would not be disappointed." "I know that," Grace said. "I know it here." She touched her temple. "But grief does things to the other places." Lily picked up the photograph. She studied her father's face, the eyes that Axe had said she had, and that Big Dave had said she had, and that her mother said she had, and she thought about a man she remembered in pieces, the shoulders, the voice, the warmth off the top of his head. She thought about the way he had been described to her last night by people who had known him as a grown man, among other grown men, not just as her father, and how those two pictures had come together overnight into something more whole than either one had been alone. "I think he'd say you did good, Mama," Lily said. 11 months. By yourself, with me. He'd say you did good." Grace took the photograph back. She held it for a moment. Then she did something she hadn't done in 6 months. She started talking to it. Quietly, not performing it, just the way you talk to someone who is real to you. "We're okay, Rye," she said. "We're going to be okay." A pause. "She looks just like you. You would absolutely not be able to handle it." Lily laughed. It came from somewhere deep and genuine and surprised. Grace laughed too, and the laughter ran together in the small, warm room, and it was the best sound Lily had heard in a very long time. Then Grace's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face changed. "Collin County Medical," she said. Lily sat up straight. Grace answered. "This is Grace Harper." A pause. She listened. Her expression was unreadable in the way that faces go unreadable when the stakes are too high to let anything through. She listened for a long time, said yes twice, said "I understand," said "thank you" in the voice she used when she meant it all the way down. She hung up. Lily waited. "That was Dr. Okoye's office," Grace said. Her voice was very controlled. "They moved the appointment. They don't want to wait until Thursday." Lily's heart stuttered. Is that good or bad?" "They want to see me tomorrow," Grace said. The doctor cleared her schedule. A pause. "The woman I spoke with said Dr. Okoye reviewed my file last night and wanted to—" Grace stopped, took a breath. "She said the doctor felt it was important not to wait, that there were options she wanted to discuss urgently." She used the word urgently. Lily stared at her. "What does that mean?" "I think," Grace said slowly, as if she was still catching up to the words as they came out of her mouth, "it means that the right person finally looked at the right file at the right time." She looked at Lily. "I think it means your walk mattered more than we knew." The room held still. Then Lily stood up. "I have to call Axe," she said. "He said Thursday, but it is tomorrow now. He needs to know." Lily. "He said they'd drive us." She was already moving. "He said, and Coop said he'd be in the parking lot." She stopped and looked at her mother. "You can't tell me no. This is not a situation where you get to say we'll figure it out ourselves." Grace looked at her daughter, 9 years old, standing in the kitchen with her father's eyes and her father's jaw and every ounce of her father's stubborn, magnificent refusal to do nothing when something needed doing. She said, "Call him." Lily called, and Axe picked up on the second ring. She told him. There was a brief pause. "We'll be there at 7:30, he said, "and you'll make it in plenty of time." She hung up. She stood in the kitchen and looked at her mother and felt the day around them, the warm air moving through the vents, the clean table, the telephone call that had just happened, the one that would happen tomorrow, the appointments and the trials and the doors that had opened in the night. And she felt the particular weight of being a person who has done the thing they needed to do and is now standing on the other side of it, not at the end, but at a beginning. "Mama," she said. "Yeah, baby." "I want to go see Daddy's bike." Grace looked at her for a moment. Then she stood up and she took Lily's hand and they went out through the back door together and crossed the yard, and Grace lifted the padlock with the key that Lily had put back that morning, properly this time back where it belonged. The shed door swung open. The smell came out, oil leather, that particular something underneath that had no name. The Harley sat there exactly as it had been. They stood side by side in the doorway. "Why?" Mother and daughter, and looked at it. "He'd want you to ride it someday," Grace said, "when you're old enough." "I know," Lily said. "He'd want you to learn on something smaller first and then graduate to it. And he'd want to be there for every step of it. And since he can't be," Grace's voice caught just once and released. "Since he can't be, I think Axe might be the right person to teach you when the time comes." Lily looked at the bike, at the chrome at the handlebars, at the seat worn smooth where her father had sat for thousands of miles. She thought about the key in her pocket, the one she had carried through the cold and the dark, in the bar and the ride home, and all of this day. She reached in and took it out and looked at it. Then she walked to the corner of the shed where the coffee can sat on the shelf next to the photograph that usually lived inside it, the photograph that was now in the kitchen, back out in the light where it belonged, and she set the key in the bottom of the can and put the lid back on and set it back on the shelf. "It stays," she said. "It stays," Grace said. Lily turned it and looked at her mother. Really looked at her the way she had been looking at her for 11 months, cataloging every small change, monitoring, measuring the way children do when they are afraid of losing someone and do not know what else to do with the fear. And what she saw was different from what she usually saw. The exhaustion was still there, the thinness, the evidence of a body that had been fighting for a long time. But something else was there too that hadn't been there in months. Something that sat behind her mother's eyes and in the set of her shoulders, and in the way she was breathing, open and steady, not managed, not rationed, not held in reserve. Grace Harper looked like a woman who had decided to live, not who had been told she might live, or who hoped she might live, or who was trying to be optimistic for her daughter's sake. A woman who had decided at the cellular level where decisions like that get made, that she was going to fight with everything she had because everything she had was standing right in front of her. "Come on," Grace said and held out her hand. Lily took it. They walked back inside together into the warm trailer with the humming vents and the clean table and the telephone numbers of 40 new people who would pick up when they called, and Lily sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out her notebook and her stubby pencil, and she wrote at the top of a clean page in careful block letters, not a list of debts this time, but something else entirely. She wrote Thursday, "Dr. Okoye, new treatment, Axe picks us up at 7:30. She underlined it twice. Then she set the pencil down and looked at her mother across the table, and Grace looked back at her, and neither of them needed to say anything, because some things are already said in the asking, and the answering, and the walking, and the knocking, and the refusing to quit when quitting would have been so much easier. A girl had walked 8 miles in the dark to save her mother's life, and the dark had given back more than she had brought to it, had given back light and heat and full-paid bills, and a doctor who cared, and 400 men who showed up, and the knowledge carried now in the bones and not just the head that love at its best is not a feeling but a decision made again and again in the cold on the road at the door in the asking. Ryan Harper's daughter had knocked on the door, and every single one of them had opened.